Hello, my monstrosities. Hello once again. Today I bring to you a thought that's been itching at me. And I gotta admit, it does come off of the back of something that was said elsewhere. Um, and it's always easy to punch up, so I won't give too much more. But if you saw or heard this opinion already, you already know where I'm talking about. But it's what do Tyranids need because they have a good detachment, but they're still not doing amazing because it's tier in the data sheets. But I wouldn't change anything, right? That I don't like that take personally. Um, I understand it. I don't necessarily like it. But the reason isn't so much of why it was said. It's because it made me think about how subterranean assault is going to cause the same problems for Tyranids as a whole as Invasion Fleet does. And what do I mean by that? You can't make too many things good without then turning other things problematic, right? And now the entire faction has to be balanced around subterranean assault. Why is that? It doesn't have to be. Okay, let's take that back for a second. From a, I guess you would say competitive standpoint, but from a truthful balance standpoint, that's what would happen. If somebody is thinking about game balance, which DW tends to do. Why is that? Well, and what do I mean by versus invasion fleet? Well, going again to the second that you make anything, you know, good, you just go, how about I make it now teleport? Which also comes to another thing that bothers me about Subterranean Assault is it's so good. We haven't seen this anywhere, but we have, and I've already covered that several times. It's Demonic Incursion, it's Hypercrypt Legion, it's Warpbane Task Force. We've seen this. We actually have seen this. It's just different when you go, oh, but what if I do it with bugs, with different loops, right? Instead of for three, 3 units in old Hypercrypt Legion, right? I get to pick them up with an enhancement 4 and just put them other places. What if, hear me out, I had to use snakes to do it, right? And you see that in Hypercrypt Legion, when it was at its best, a lot of it boiled down to Catan spam, because how do you uh, make Catan better? You take away the weakness of how slow they move across the field, right? Except for the Transcendent Catan. So Subterranean Assault presents that new issue. A lot of our monsters, one of their weaknesses is movement. Um, in the sense that it's just a monster. It's not. It's the fact that being a monster sometimes is detrimental to the field, right? If it's especially if it's terrain dense, yeah, you'll get cover at every aspect of the way, but without an invuln save and like a better save, that also means you're probably getting shot from all those same angles. You have cover, but you're getting shot, and you can't just go through a wall. One thing that I used to love about Crusher Stampede is like, well, now I get to play with the walls too, right? Um, and then furthermore, on Subterranean Assault itself is that it takes away that weakness from not just monsters. It takes away that weakness from most of the army, right? I was looking to see like other things when I've been talking about these boxes that you get offered from the GW store. And I was thinking about barb gaunts and pyrovores and all these things. It's like, well, I've been talking about a shooting list. What if you bring back a Matt Laura style list, except instead of Vanguard Onslaught, you go to Subterranean Assault and make the barb gaunts come out of these holes here? instead of having to spend a command point and going, well, they're going to go be here, and one unit's going to go here. What if a couple of units come out, get some angles, and drop there? We've already seen that the Hive Guard have become more important with their points. And to that point, I think that's the only thing that realistically we might see for the rest of the edition because of the balance issue that these two detachments cause. Um, it's points adjustments. I do feel that Tyranids should be cheaper. I I still don't. Not, of course, not all of them, right? If you were like, if you want a horror specs to be below 100, you're insane. And I'd agree. I don't think we need to go that far. But I do think a Screamer Killer can still come down. I think the Psychophage can come back to its old points. Things like that. Um, and that's just something that I'm looking for 11th edition. I'm still saving my thoughts on what I want out of 11th edition for Tyranids because I want to see kind of what like the final balance passes do. I thought I was going to release it earlier, but I want to at least see the next balance data slate to see what they end up doing before I end up just saying thinking they throw it in 10th edition and then it doesn't make it over to 11th or something. Not to say that they listen to me like that at all, I'm just saying. But um to that end, it's like, well, why do I think Tyranid should be cheaper? Because it still doesn't make sense, right? A Hive Tyrant being cheaper than Belisarius Call doesn't. I'm sorry, Belisarius Call being cheaper than a Hive Tyrant doesn't sit right with me. That doesn't doesn't make sense. Orcs being cheaper with things out the ass doesn't make sense. And here's another thing about Subterranean Assault, which is why I'm like, this doesn't deserve as much hoopla. We finally have transports. Okay? This is our transport detachment. Everybody else gets fucking transports, and guess what happens when you have transports? You can play the game. Your infantry doesn't have to slowly hobble over there. This is our transports availability. I wouldn't even say transport detachment. I'd say this is, hey, we gave you all a drop pod. We took away the ability from the Trigon from previous editions. We're just going to make it a detachment. And you all are going to say Kalu Kalay because you can finally play. Right? This is the transport detachment. And I think that's the other thing that slightly irks me about the rhetoric of Subterranean Assault. It's like, yeah, if we just had this on the data sheets of tier of the Trigon, I wouldn't be fussed, right? Yeah, it's cool that it can extend to Raveners and Moloch now, but you took away this ability that was kind of integral to some things. It's kind of integral to, I wouldn't say that a lot of the Tyranid lore, but a fair portion of it. Um, Fair enough portion. I won't go that far either. But and then made a detachment, and now you see, hey, if you just had this, right, instead of making it in a making it and making it a detachment, um, the faction wouldn't now be in this balance hell between two detachments. Now, I should really address what I mean by that. So, why do I liken it to Invasion Fleet? Well, let's take something like Death Guard. And you go, but Death Guard's like super overtuned right now. How can you? That's not what I mean by that sense, right? I also feel like if Death Guard is this cheap, we should be cheaper, right? But that aside, all of their data, excuse me, of Nurgle's data sheets have lethal hits. So yeah, they don't have, too many tank busting units. But at the end of the day, if they can get there, they have a fighting chance. Because everything they do has lethal hits. And then Death Guard, on top of that, have an aura of -1 toughness, making it a little bit easier on that front too. So you're very rarely having to wound on sixes. You're at least doing it on five. So lethals on six for hits, fives to wound. Yeah, that gives you a fighting chance if you can get there. And now you'd say, well, Death Guard's slow, right? And that's correct for most intensive purposes. Um, they have some deep strike shenanigans, right? Some units can get there, but then when they get there, I think they have like a 4-inch movement, if I remember correctly, on top of that. So, like, the deep strike could be 9 inches, but it still might take 2 or 3 turns to get to the target. But, to that end, they're slow. However, the Death Guard thing has also then been being tough. So, you have this balancing thing where it's like, yeah, to get past the fact that if they touch you, they can kill you, we're going to make them slow. But to not make it feel so bad for them, with them being slow, they'll at least be tough. So there's a checks and balances that exist for that faction. Meanwhile, here in Tyranids, looking at Invasion Fleet, you look at our codex, right? And let's hope that this hasn't continued to. Cool. I don't know why Wahapedia was trying to dox me really hard this morning. But you look at our codex, and I've brought this up before. Not too many things have sustain or lethal on their data sheet. We have a couple of things with devastating wounds, and this is where I get annoyed by some things where, you look at it, it's like, yeah, but, look at all the twin linked. I remember seeing that being said, and I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? The Tyrants, the melee warriors, now the hyper adapted Raveners. What else are we talking about with twin link? The Harpy, yeah, sure, yeah, right, has twin linked, but let's be real for a second. Not, I don't know where all this oodles of twin linked came from, and that'd be another thing. If all of our units had a unique thing such as twin linked, I'd be less fussed about that. Like, if that was the thing that you had playing Tyranids, I'd be less fussed about it. I wouldn't love it, right? Um, but you know, it's something, right? Sorry, Spine Fist. Forgot Spine Fist. Right? If that was a thing, like, hey, you're a super adapted organism. We gave these guys over here the ability to like kill anything they touch because they're a disease, they're a plague. We gave those guys over there like sustained out the ass, right? Uh, that army over there, hey, they're stratagem reliant, so we gave them a fuck ton of usable stratagems, like, things like that. If there was a cohesive thing on Tyranids, on the data sheets, I would love that, right? Oh, but Monster Synapse, they gave you +1 to strength, and for what though? For what though? Especially like, let's be real. For what though? The +1 to strength does put some things on 5 to 4, maybe. The very generous 4 to 3. But we aren't a melee army in that regard. There's not oodles of great melee units, or else we wouldn't be looking at this supercharged unit that is kind of changing everything. And that's where I want to go with hyper adapted Raveners, where outside of, alright, now we have to balance the entire faction around. We can't give this unit lethal hits like that, or else you get sustained lethal infantry and swarm and invasion fleet. We can't give it too much sustained and lethal, and we can't give it too much sustained, or else now you have sustained lethal versus monsters and vehicles and invasion fleet. And then you go, but monster, I thought you couldn't. They just did that. They also gave them anti-monster 5-up, anti-vehicle 5-up, twin linked. The ranged weapon is a flamer, so it won't ever benefit from it. So that's the caveat of, hey, are you going to let 10 T5 models into your monster or vehicle? Admittedly, if they get there, it should hurt, right? It should hurt. Damage 2, AP 2. And to the twin linked aspect, it's like that's nice, so that you will never wound them greater than 5. But then you crunch the numbers on the math, it's like, well, wait a minute. What the fuck was I actually punching that was going to put me on 6 besides a great unclean one anyway? Right? especially with the way the game has changed, and knights being lowered in toughness. And then here comes the other thing that I wanted to talk about with that knights. One of the talking points uh, to be said is that, yeah, once knights get handled, it should be better for Tyranids because we currently don't have too many great answers for knights, specifically. And I will address the Tacoma thing in a second too. Um, you don't have too many great things for knights, so once knights get handled, you should be fine. Which maybe, but the other thing is that everybody, the reason it's also a struggle isn't just because of knights themselves, which, don't get me wrong, they are a big predator, right? But it's the fact that everybody else has figured out how do we address knight profiles. I've talked about this several times, and we've all talked about it, right? That's why you can't put too many monsters on the table right now of not Norn emissary level, I guess, right? Um, because people are looking at it and going, hey, I know how to kill a knight now with my army. I might not win, but I'm going to give my darn tootinest try to win against a flock of knights, okay? So this profile dies. And then you look over here to Tyranids and you get a profile that, let's go with a famous one, Exocrine, right? T10, 3 up save, 14 wounds. Yeah, if you could kill a knight, you can kill both Exocrines. It'll happen. If not the triple Exocrine, right? And for probably less points invested. And the Exocrine won't have a way to do back to you the damage that a knight is capable of. So there's that. And yeah, I realize now that I've talked about the big contenders of the meta, Knights and Death Guard, in relation to this, but that's not where it's supposed to lie. As to, I don't want us to be balanced the same way that Knights and Death Guard are. I don't want to be overtuned like a motherfucker. I don't think many people want that for their faction. Some people do. I'm not one of them. But I do want to realistically look at it and go, I don't want to have a bad 3 to 6 months because those three factions over there are capable of doing whatever they want, on top of the fact that my data sheets just can't do anything close to other people. But you go to Tacoma and you go, Tyranids got second at a super major. And for the entire edition, that is our best placing at a super major from what I can remember. Now, I admit I am biased towards North America and Britain. Let's go with Britain, right? Or UK, whatever breakouts are there. So if you tell me that there was a super major in Romania, I don't know, that I didn't see that Tyranids won, I'm sorry. And no offense to anybody of Romanian nationality right here. It's just the first one I could think of. Um, but as far as for the entire 2 years we're at, Tyranids haven't been better than second at a super major. Now, that's quite the feat and accomplishment, but it'd be different if we were several times second at super majors. We've had about 2 or 3 more top 8s that I can remember, and a couple more top 16s. But it was done using, of course, Subterranean Assault. So back to the issue of what do you do without making it so that now we do become an issue? And I am left with only you just have to make their points cheaper, right? I think that's the only logical thing because looking at equivalency, right? I remember seeing this being a topic shared too. Uh, somewhere else. Where it's just like, well, yeah, Tyranids aren't necessarily supposed to compete one for one with, let's say, VRLs, right? VRLs 70 aren't supposed to take out, a squad of Space Marines. From a design standpoint, I remember that being the takeaway, right? They're not supposed to be equivalent, which is more or less true. But the fighting chance is supposed to be that, well, there's quite a bit of them, right? So I'm not saying that VRLs have to go to 35 points or anything wild like that. But I'm saying going into a unit, I should be at least realistically looking at the possibility of affording not another unit, like half a unit more of Von Ryan Leapers. And I mean that in the, like, if we broke it out, 1.5, there should be about five, five-ish models. So let's round up, okay? Uh, Models on the table for the equivalency of what it's going into. So I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, okay, because I'm not saying that Von Ryan's Leapers need to be cheaper themselves. The specific unit that I'm using as an example does not need to be that much cheaper themselves. They've actually even come down in points from them previously being at 75 to now being 70, which I love, right? Um, but I am saying that for the way that the rest of the game has been balanced, it kind of doesn't make so much sense that I'll look at, Von Ryan's Leapers being 70, and then I'll look at a squad of, let's say, what's a good orc unit? And I think really compares to this. Uh, what are knobs at nowadays? Knobs are 105. I think there's two outside the realm. Ludas. Let's go with Ludas. What are Ludas nowadays? Ludas are 50 points for 5. Okay. 115 for 10. I am saying that a squad of Von Ryan's Leapers probably shouldn't be 20 points more expensive than 5 Ludas. That is something I will say, right? Because that seems a bit absurd, and that I don't think 10 Ludas at 115 sits right with 6 Von Ryan's Leapers at 140. Um, that that comparison that I do think is a little bit more fair, and doesn't make quite the much sense, right? However, I don't necessarily want orcs to go up because they also are. This is my thing where I do want a bit of. I shouldn't say a bit, but I do like lore aspects coming into tabletop, right? I'm not saying that every epic hero needs to be an unkillable epic hero and all of that such and all of that jazz. But yeah, their thing is, yeah, it's tough to get rid of the orcs once they're on your planet because they just keep producing. So orcs being cheap, I don't mind. I do mind when they don't realize how cheap they are. When they go, what? Man, my truck went up to, what is it now, 70 or 75? Let's look at that. And I say this as somebody that likes orcs, right? Yeah, my truck went up to 70. Faction unplayable. And I'm like, are you fucking with me? I would love a 70-point transport in this army. Or this army. Or this army. Like, come on now. So it's things like that I'm like, alright, you are still insanely cheap across the board. I just think that GW does go a lot heavy handed when it comes to orcs. And I have another I've talked about it on video before, but I won't. This isn't an orc video, so I won't go that far down the rabbit hole. But um, then there comes back to the other thing, though, right? Of the units themselves having good rules. Hyperadaptive Raveners have kind of been saving our ass. They've been saving our ass in Vanguard Onslaught And they've been some inclusions, some not, in Subterranean Assault. And as I was taking a peek, I don't think that this is a large sample size enough though, but I was taking a peek, and of the Vanguard Onslaught list, the people that have gotten their hyper adapted Raffiners into those lists, they're doing alright. But now, do you go back to the issue of, alright, now we have to balance the entire faction around what if they take hyper adapted Raveners, and what if they're playing these two detachments? We can't give too many rules changes that give them better things like lethal, sustained on the data sheets, right? That they are missing from most of the data sheets here. Can't give them too many devastating wounds, or else they just come over to invasion fleet and they tear ass. And you can't give them too much stuff, because if a lot of stuff comes out of holes, they go to Subterranean Assault, and they can't make them too much better, because if too much good shit comes out of holes in Subterranean Assault, spaghetti-o, Tyranids are a problem. So what is the solution? Personally, I'm still in favor in seeing where the points lie. I think I'd rather see points changes in terms of that, because yeah, does it make me sad that uh, other detachments don't necessarily get the same benefits of a boost when it is only points changes? But I think comparatively to changing the rules on data sheets and making other things a problem, that's the safer route. However, if GW still has gas in the tank for creativity, I would still really like to see the detachments themselves get touch ups. Right? Um, I, the entire edition, I haven't really shared the same sentiment as some people that, yeah, Tyranids are blessed with a great codex because every detachment is able to be put on the table compared to some of these other ones where it's just like, why are you doing that? I haven't necessarily shared that sentiment because that's not how it was for most of the codex. Yeah, for that first year, I should say. Crusher Stampede had to be touched up. Unending Swarm is, as most people would consider, dead. Assimilation Swarm had to be touched up. Vanguard Onslaught gets better with new things being Vanguards. They had to touch up the snakes being Vanguards. Uh, some of the Vanguard units finally became Synapse, even though they were in previous editions. And now we have hyper adapted Raveners, so they become better. This detachment becomes better with more things in it. Synaptic Nexus, we've been hit or miss. We've tried, and it still can be better. It still can be better. There's been several times you look over and go, Synaptic Nexus, right? And it just hasn't stuck. Now, I'm not saying that it needs to be Subterranean Assault level, but I do think it should be not that far off from Gladius. If you're going to port, and that's not specifically for Synaptic Nexus, I think that should be the way for all of the detachments that have been written like Gladius. You get to do a different thing for 3 out of the 5 rounds. You get to choose a thing that applies to your units, have fun making 3 out of 5 turns work. I think if I only have rules for 3/5 of the game from a detachment, they should be pretty good rules. There's two rounds that I'm not doing jack shit, and that's fucked. So to Tao, Monka, and uh Cal Yon, right? Yeah. I think that if that's how you're gonna write that, those should be better. I don't think that you needed to take the sustain 2 away from Cal Yan, if I'm being honest. Um, and we see Monka come out on top because yeah, lethal hits. Cough. What? What? Lethal hits coming back into the conversation again. Monka has done fine, and to be fair, we have seen sparks of Kalyan. Um, but any of those things. Then you look at Sisters with Penitent Host. I do think that that should be better. I think it should be penitent units, not penitent models. That way you can use things like the Ministorum Priest attaching to things and get better results. Like some of those things, I think that's just my take on that style of list. And Warrior Bio from Onslaught, I do think you could just make Warriors better. I still think Warriors should be a little bit better than they are. Um, but say all this to say that I don't share the overarching thought that you should stop balancing or stop changing rules on data sheets simply because you've made two detachments the entire faction relies on. Right? I don't love that. Now, I said the Norns because in the lore, they do Vanguard Invader Assassin bullshit. Right? I can understand that Vanguard Onslaught is like, no, look, they're the first things to get to the thing, so like they might not drop a Norn first. I got that. But if we're doing the theme of, well, if they're doing Snake Assassin bullshit, that's one of my hotter takes that I would have loved to see. But that's just only going to the fact of how would you make something like Vanguard Onslaught better so that it doesn't fluctuate so hard that some weeks it's 60, some weeks it's 30, uh, some months it's 30, some days it's 60 more like uh percent win rate. Uh that would be a thing, right? It does obviously seem that if you just give more things keywords for that detachment, it gets slightly better in a way, right? Um but it is also one of the few detachments out of our book that doesn't just say, "Hey, insert keyword here, you're better now." Which it does for Vanguard Invaders, but it also says, "Hey, every Tyranid unit can fall back in charge now." That's things like that. So there needs to be more, maybe unique rules across the detachments, right? People look at Subterranean and say, "Why did they give every Tyranid a reroll hit rolls of 1?" And I'm like, because they did that with Warpbane Task Force. And you can do that in Hypercrypt? No. Sorry, I'm blanking on Hypercrypt. But there's a reroll something situation. But they did it in Warpbane Task Force, and now this is just our Warpbane Task Force, except we don't have to do that thing over there. Alright, so that's kind of where it is on that one. And then it's just, it's frustrating. It frustrates me that to get something good means that you have to be really careful for the rest of the other things that need balance. Detachments need balance, data sheets need balance, point changes need balance, or points need balance. So you scratch out things that can then be changed without creating other issues. And I think some things, again, just get blown the fuck out of proportion. I personally prefer a metagame in which 3 or 4 armies can call themselves the top dog compared to one. But at the same time, it is much easier to tech for one, right? It is much easier when you go, oh, this one army backslash detachment is an issue. But then that's what happens is everybody just brings the one. So if Subterranean Assault gets busted out the ass because they say, hey, we're finally doing it, all of your winged hive tyrants give an aura of sustained. We gave the regular Hive Tyrant lethal. Everybody around a Winged Hive Tyrant gets sustained. Okay? Let's say that's what happens. And then everybody goes, alright, now I don't need to use Enfilading Emergence as many times in Subterranean Assault. It frees me up a command point and the command point Hungry Detachment. So now I can do other things and it goes insane. Or my the horror specs. Sure, fuck it. My horror specs now has sustained lethal into monsters and vehicles for only 125 points in Invasion Fleet, and because it's next to a Winged Hive Tyrant, I get to give him a 5-up, feel no pain, like shit like that. It gets hard, but I do still think, yeah, you've made the Winged Hive Tyrant the same points as Flying Demon Princes, and you've made the Hive Tyrant the same price as Walking Demon Princes, but they don't quite offer the same shit. They really don't. So, I think you just have to realize, yeah, it's easy. The easy way out is to say, hey, uh, points. And I think that's the safer way. And I'm not too fussed about it. But I do worry when GW has something that isn't quite the equivalent as other things. The rulers might be looking at something like the Screamer Killer, right? And they still tiptoe around dropping its points. We saw it go to 135, and we went, yay! We can put this in Subterranean Assault. And people did. And people realized, alright, I whiffed on some of my attacks on the Screamer Killer. It's only T9, 10 wounds. So yeah, one of the big issues was getting it up the board, but we fucked around and found out that that wasn't the only issue with the Screamer Killer. Uh-oh, Spaghettio, there goes 135 points. I should have brought a Haruspex instead. I think things like that, looking at the points, and then you look at like a Dreadnought, you look at a Hellbrute, you look at their rules, you look at their profile, you look at the things that the army rule can do for them. And yeah, is it scary if you give us more Hive Guard, right? You drop the points. I think they can still come down another 5 and 10 to make it so that I'm not only using them in the Subterranean Assault because they can, be of some value there, but I would like to have this opportunity in Invasion Fleet. I would like to have that opportunity realistically in Vanguard Onslaught. Shit like that. Synaptic Nexus. Synaptic Nexus doesn't offer jack shit for a lot of things. But yeah, right? I would like things like that to happen more often. So they ease up, but it does start to make you wonder what they want the identity of Tyranids to be this edition. There were some Battleshock things. They fixed that from Chaos Knights and Chaos Demons, kind of. And the fact that they realized, yeah, this Battleshock thing isn't really too lovely. Hell, even looking at something like Drukhari, where they could get pain tokens from you being Battleshock, you also could just get pain tokens from other shit, right? It's not just like that. Um, Actually, let's see other factions really quick. I know that there's another faction that had a Battleshock thing I'm forgetting, right? Sisters, Custodies, do do do. No, was it just us? And Chaos Knights and Chaos Demons? Well, Chaos Demons got fucking their sheets tuned to not overtuned. I don't think they're too overtuned, but they did get quite the glow up. And I still don't understand why they did what they did with Chaos Demons. Like, you took the time to make Imperial Agents a fucking book. I don't know why you thought that you would get rid of Chaos Demons as a faction. That doesn't make sense to me. Um, but yeah, Chaos Demons. Hell, the Battleshock does something. There's some mortal wounds on top of that. But again, there's another rule on there. We get a once per game. Everything has to take a Battleshock test on the table. Hope everybody fails. Chaos Knights, they removed that element from it, right? So I think my biggest gripes with asking for more things this edition for Tyranids is I think at this point you're right. Maybe you can't change data sheets. Maybe maybe you can't. But you can change the points and you can make it so that the army rule does something for you. +1 to strength is cute. We don't melee like that. We fucked around and found out that Subterranean Assault, even with 6-inch charges, you don't melee like the other ones can, right? You fuck around and find out really quickly that the volume attacks for some of your shit, if you whiff once or twice, they will clap back and take your shit. So there's a lot of issues, and I think I am still going to wait for my 11th edition once out of Tyranids for the next balanced data slate to drop, and maybe even a month after that to see how that affects everything. But I'm not too hopeful that there will be a lot on the docket for us. If anything, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Is they're going to say, well, we nerfed Knights and Death Guard, so everybody should be good again, right? Yay. But mind you, something like Necrons, they buff Necrons, and Necrons are, as of a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, uh, at 50, right? So they're surviving overall from the data from a week ago. But even looked at Meta Monday like 2 weeks ago, they were struggling too. So they got sizable buffs and into struggling. We got a new detachment as the quote unquote buff. We got other changes that I don't know. We really did try to make them work, and I'm not saying that it's terrible, all bad, all evil. Oh, wish we did. Woe is us. But I will say, I think the psychophage has proven not as amazing as we hoped for us. And Subterranean Assault Melee, because again, both things, we have a lot of issues with Melee. So I think there's that aspect of it. And I'll just wrap this up with I hope that in the future, whether that be the finishing of this edition, moving editions forward, this is a very grand hope, right? I hope that armies aren't defined by singular detachments and data sheets. Because yes, if you give me more hyper adapted Raveners, well, you aren't going to give me more, if I'm being honest. But if you give me hyper adapted Raveners and the ability to bring more things, some things could get a little bit interesting. But at the same time, I'm not going to try to say that the hyper adapted Raveners are oh so scary. They are just significantly better than the rest of our infantry. Like, it's not close. If you had to ask me right now which is your best infantry unit, it's this. But then you look at the other infantry unit, and that's why. Other infantry units, and that's why. So I don't like the idea that I think there should be more things of this standard, right? Maybe you put more free things on things, right? We don't get grenade and tank shock. We got smoke finally, but maybe the smoke on the psychophage should be free. Or sorry, 0 command points, because technically it can go up to 1 command point with a Lord of Deceit, yada yada yada. Right? Maybe that's how you do it, right? Maybe our army thing is that in Synapse you get. I pitched this before. Maybe in Synapse you get to do a thing for free. And then the Hive Tyrant just makes it so that you get to do another thing for free. Once per turn, you get a free thing on that unit. I don't fucking know. We don't have captains, right? Captains and Space Marines get that and other shit. So that's my things. I think all can be fixed eventually. And will it be fixed by the end of the edition? Probably not. But I did really want to give my thoughts on the idea that, yeah, everything's not great, but it's not great. But I wouldn't change anything about it, and I'm not going to take it to tournaments either. Like that doesn't necessarily sit right with me as the logic following. So I think that you can't have that. Just doesn't make sense to me. So I didn't really like that as a take, and wanted to expand upon that without necessarily being like, yeah, that's just like I don't like just straight up shitting on people, but I like when logic tracks. I don't like when illogical things like that are said and spread, right? And so, yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm gonna stop yapping. If you like the video, like it. Got a comment for me, comment. And until next time, peace out, my monstrosities.